2004 was the year of the handheld wars. It was Sony versus Nintendo. At E3 of that year, Sony revealed the PSP, and Nintendo announced their follow-up to the extremely successful Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS.
But Nintendo was adamant that the DS was not the successor to the Game Boy Advance. It was based on an all-new concept and would provide players with a unique and interesting experience. And when it was released in North America for $149 in November of 2004, there were already 3 million pre-orders sold, and it shipped an additional 550,000 units during its launch week. The Sony PSP also had a very successful launch and went on to sell over 80 million units. But the Nintendo DS was on another level and sold over 150 million units worldwide and is considered the most successful handheld ever released to date. The Nintendo DS is a small, lightweight handheld device that immediately attracted the attention of hackers that wanted to run things like Homebrew, Linux, and emulators. And in early 2005, just a few short months after the launch of the Nintendo DS, there were methods to do so. In order to understand Homebrew on the Nintendo DS, we need to take a look at the hardware first. The Nintendo DS comes with two LCD TFT displays, with the bottom screen being used for touch. Two ARM CPU processors power the device, with the second ARM7 acting as a co-processor and running at approximately 33 MHz, which is half the speed of the main CPU. Each Nintendo DS comes with wireless communications, and this was the first device that took advantage of the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, something that we've covered recently on the channel when looking at online multiplayer gaming on the Nintendo Wii. The Nintendo DS introduced touch to gaming, and it was revolutionary for its time, something that's very much a standard in mobile and handheld gaming today. The Nintendo DS also came with two cartridge ports, named Slot 1 for regular Nintendo DS cartridges, and removing the expansion cover at the base of the system is Slot 2. Although Nintendo claimed that the DS was not the successor to the Game Boy Advance, Slot 2 was for GBA cartridges. The system is fully backward compatible, and you could even designate which screen you wanted to play GBA games on. The Game Boy Advance had no copy protection. This meant that it wasn't long before flashcards became available that allowed ROMs to run. When the Nintendo DS was released, Nintendo incorporated encryption into the DS slot, but still did not implement any copy protection at all to Slot 2, the GBA port. And this was the first weak point that hackers had targeted. While GBA flashcards still worked on the DS, it only ran GBA code. The problem was now to run DS code from the GBA address space. This began the research and methods known as pass-through. The first hardware, known as Pass.Me, was a hardware device that redirects DS code over to Slot 2, and with a GBA flashcard, you could then boot into DS Homebrew and games. Another software method, known as Flash.Me, was a custom firmware install that booted Nintendo DS directly from Slot 2. Nintendo was not happy. They quickly patched the exploit and blocked the use of Pass.Me and caused many brick systems that had Flash.Me installed. But hackers released the Pass.Me 2, which required the use of certain games to work, essentially requiring specific data to be present in the game. But the result once again was for the DS code to run via the Game Boy Advance flashcard. Flash.Me was also updated, now to be brick friendly by installing itself in areas of ROM that would never be overwritten. In January of 2006, just over a year into the lifecycle of the Nintendo DS, Martin Korth, the developer of the Game Boy Advance and DS emulator known as No Cache GBA, cracked the Nintendo DS encryption on game cards. This meant that devices could be plugged into Slot 1 and boot DS code without relying on custom firmwares or the use of Slot 2. In my opinion, the best Nintendo DS handheld to get for retro gaming, homebrew, and emulators is the Nintendo DS Lite. Not only are they more lightweight than the original model, they have a great control scheme, and the good news is these things are super cheap to buy. This particular model here, which is the silver model, cost me $25 on Craigslist, and it runs emulation and homebrew really well. So you could do a lot worse than getting something like this, and you can really enjoy emulation and homebrew on the go with the Nintendo DS Lite. After the Slot 1 card encryption was cracked, many different solutions flooded the market. The R4 Gold Pro is one of the few flash cards that was released that's still available today. Although I believe these are just some cheap clones of the original versions, they still perform the same job, allowing homebrew emulators and backups to run on your Nintendo DS. Now of course, the R4 Gold Pro also works on the Nintendo 3DS, and homebrew for that system will be covered in a future episode. Setting up the R4 Gold Pro on the Nintendo DS is simple to do. The R4 Gold Pro comes with a flash card and a micro SD card reader. You can use up to 32GB micro SD cards, which is more than enough space. On a PC, make sure it's formatted as FAT32. Now for the next thing to do is to download the firmware for the R4 Gold Pro. You can do this by going to the website www.r4isdhc.com. Then click on the R4 download in the menu, then scroll down to the R4 Gold Pro and click download. Now extract the contents of the file to the root of the SD card. Now from here, make sure you copy the homebrew and emulators that you want to play onto the SD card. If you're playing emulators, make sure you include the appropriate ROMs you're playing as well. Once you have it all set up, eject the micro SD card from your PC and then plug the micro SD card into the R4 flash card. Then connect that card into slot 1 of the Nintendo DS and power up the Nintendo DS. Select or click on the Touch Bomberman Land game and that will boot into the R4 firmware. Now press A and your homebrew should appear on the list. The Nintendo DS certainly isn't a powerful system by today's standards, but it still has some great emulators that run on the system. Here are my picks for the ones that you must install. Let's set some expectations. The Nintendo DS runs at 66 MHz and lacks the power to emulate a Super Nintendo. The app, known as Snemule DS, runs pretty well all things considered. The speed is great, but it has some major hacks, speed-ups and shortcuts to get the job done. If you're looking for accuracy, you won't find it here. The sound also has issues and it may turn some folks away, but it handles most ROMs and plays them pretty well. This is about the best Super NES emulation that you would ever get on the Nintendo DS, and knowing that in advance makes this emulator impressive. Genesis DS is a very good Sega Genesis emulator for the Nintendo DS. Like the Super NES, emulating a Genesis on the DS is a challenge, and while the emulation isn't perfect, it runs a Genesis at very good speeds and accuracy, and it also includes save states. Sadly, it has trouble loading larger ROMs, like Sonic and Knuckles, but otherwise, if you want to play the classics for the Genesis on your DS, this is a must install. S8DS is a Game Gear, ColecoVision Master System and SG-1000 emulator. It runs all those ROMs very well with good performance and compatibility, supports save states, and comes with many different screen scaling options. There's also a huge list of homebrew for the Nintendo DS that's really worth checking out. I only took a look at a few, but I was very impressed with what I saw. There's over 1,000 different homebrew games and applications available for the Nintendo DS, and there's definitely some gems in that list. If you've used any that you could recommend, please let me know in the comments below. Overall, there's a lot to like about the Nintendo DS in 2019. It's cheap, easy to set up, and has a ton of homebrew available for it, and in my opinion, it's still a great handheld device, and one that may be worth checking out in 2019. So in conclusion, the Nintendo DS even to this day makes a really awesome emulation device. Not only do you have something like this, the Nintendo DS Lite, that's small form factor, cheap to buy, and plays emulators and homebrew exceptionally well. Look, nothing is perfect on something like this. There's been a lot of hacks that have been done in order to get things to run on the Nintendo DS, but the amount of homebrew and emulators available for the system is quite honestly mind-blowing, especially homebrew. There's so much homebrew and original games and ports that you can play on the Nintendo DS. It's honestly something that I've really not looked into in the past, and I feel a little bit bad that I haven't really dabbled with a system like this more, but there's so much cool homebrew out there for the Nintendo DS, and do yourself a favor and check it out if you are interested. Now, I'm going to get inevitable questions. What about the 3DS? Why wouldn't you just do this on the 3DS? Now, I will be covering the Nintendo 3DS Homebrew in a future episode of the show, so stick around for that. But in this particular case, I wanted to talk about the Nintendo DS because it's a cheap handheld. This particular model, as mentioned, only cost me $25. You can get something like this for almost next to nothing and have an awesome experience with retro emulators and Homebrew. Well guys, before I go, I do have one announcement that I want to make. I will be at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo 2019 at the Cradle of Aviation Museum in Garden City in New York on August the 10th and 11th this year. I will be a guest speaker at the event and I can't wait. I've got a really interesting panel that I'm putting together that's going to be so much fun. So I will leave a link in the description below if you are wanting to attend. There's more information. I believe tickets are going on sale in the next few weeks. So if you can make it to the Long Island area in New York, I'd love to see you guys come along and hang out. It's going to be so much fun. Well guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.